scripture reading for today is found in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 13 through 15. And 2 Corinthians 5:13 reads, "For whether we be beside ourselves, it is to God, or whether we be sober, it is for your cause. For the love of Christ constraineth us, because we thus judge, that if one died for all, then we're all dead. And that he died for all, that they which live should not henceforth live unto themselves, but unto him which died for them and rose again." May the Lord add a blessing to the reading of his word today.
Good afternoon. So my favorite text, and I think sometimes we try to put it all in the spiritual context, but there in verse 13 it says, "For whether we be beside ourselves, it is to God, or whether we be sober, it is for your cause." This goes along with Paul's life theory that he's going to do whatever it can to what the song we just heard. Lord, how are you going to use me today? Whatever it takes. When we get me out of the way, it's not about me anymore. What can I do today to be the vehicle? And then he comes through with his inspired from God. For the love of God, or the love of Christ, is this constraining power. Whether you're talking about your appetite, or whether you're talking about your waistline, or whether you're talking about a hasty word. There's no separation. God doesn't separate the physical part of you from the spiritual part of you. We don't burn you at the stake to try to save your soul, in other words. We're all connected. Then he goes on to tell us the why. Because we thus judge, you have decided that this evidence is true. You've made a proclamation. You have judged that if one died for all, then we're all dead. And then you read that verse, keeps reading here, when Paul said, "I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless, not I, but Christ is doing the living." That's when we become missionaries. And that's when we can do something. Our topic for this hour, we've talked about it before, and I'm looking at the time, so we will progress through and we'll make our important points. So we'll move ahead with that. Ministry of Healing, an incredibly powerful book, physically and spiritually. In order to know what are the best foods, we must study God's original plan for man's diet. I said this morning that if you want to know what true science is, you study the Word of God. Our whole first session could be summarized in that first sentence of what we talked about. But God has given us ample evidence. He who created man and who understands his needs appointed Adam as food. Fruits, nuts, grains, vegetables constitute the diet chosen for us by our Creator. Who better to know how to feed you? It's that incredible. It's also that simple. And in our culture, it's also that difficult because we've taken almost every one of those foods and made them into something that can be harmful for you. We've messed up. You've probably heard me say this before. The reason I'm in business is because all the food's gotten messed up. If we would eat corn on the cob, if we would enjoy our oatmeal, and if we'd eat vegetables out of the garden, things would be a little bit simpler. To show you what's happening in the current medical system in America, this slide, let's try something. Is that switch turn off the overhead lights? Let's try it. I think we have enough light in here to be comfortable if any of you want to take notes or not. But this will definitely help, right? Because I was standing in the back looking through these lights, this light right here, and I was going, I hope we can do something better. This chart it says percentage of total, basically exposures, or if you want to call it expeditions, whatever you want to call it, what they're calling it, of the people. In other words, what part of our American population is using the most medical care? Here's what we find out. The top 1% of Americans, 1% of America is using 22% of our medical care. Let me say that again. 1% of Americans are using 22% of medical care. When we go to the top 5%, 49% of our medical care is used by 5% of the population, and the other 95% of the population is using the other 50%. One step further, the top 10% is using two-thirds of the total care in the top 10%. I hope you see what's happening here. We've got a very relatively small group of people using an enormous amount of goods. There was a hospital in Texas, and it was a small hospital, and what they did is they said, okay, why are we spending so much money, or why are we losing so much money? And they narrowed it down to 7 people that came to their hospital that was using enormous amounts of medical care. And that says 2 things. Number one, I'm sorry that people were so sick or felt they needed it. Number 2, the medical care must not have been that good because they kept coming back for more. So I'm not trying to say it's all the people or it's all the medical community. It's a fatal, and correctly used, it's a fatal combination we have here. If we go to 20% of the top population, 80% of medical care goes for 20% of the people. The bottom 50% of our population uses only 3% medical care. I hope you're in the bottom 50%. Let's go to the next slide. The next question they ask is how many people stay in those categories? Because you'd say, well, wait a minute. That year that they opened me up and gave me 3 bypasses, that happened once in my life, so in that year I would have been in the top 1%. Well, if that was our only problem, then you would say, okay, I understand. There are some catastrophic illnesses, very expensive, but look at this. It says the percentage of population with the same percentile, in other words, continuing year after year. This is in 2009. The top 1%, 20% of the people stay in that group. The top 5%, 38% stay in that group. The top 10%, 44.8, 45% of the people stay in that group. Our treatments are not effective in getting people out of the hospital. But is that our goal? I'm not just trying to be sarcastic. I'm saying that we are evaluating things different. Dr. Michael Gregory, you can go on the website, nutritionalfacts.com, and now we're starting to understand that the criteria we're using has been totally wrong for many years. For example, statin drugs do not change the incidence of people dying from heart disease. So why should we continue to give statin drugs? Well, statin drugs lower the LDL cholesterol. That's true. But you have to ask the next question. After I lower all this LDL cholesterol in this population, do they live longer? The answer is no. So then why am I bothering people to take a drug that has numerous side effects to do something that doesn't help them live longer? And I would propose, in this situation, it doesn't offer any better quality of life. So that's the question we're addressing now. Does it make a difference in longevity? The top 20%, 54% stay in that group. The top 30%, 63% stay in that group. The top 50%, 75% of the people stay in the top 50% all the time in this study. And the lower 50%, 73% stay in that group all the time. So we've got a major divide in how we take care of people in our country. The people who are sick are staying sick. The people that are well are staying well. So we want to study both groups with the emphasis on the people who are staying well. You've seen this slide before, but let's just cover it real quickly because it bears repeating. Dr. Mikhail Heideheim is a researcher back in World War I time frame in Denmark, and he came up with this novel plan that you would have come up with now if you were in his place. But we're going to stop feeding the nation's grain to livestock, and we're going to feed it to people. But on our way to church, we had a discussion. Who wants to eat all that corn out there he's seeing in the field? And who's going to eat all those good soybeans in the field? We came to the conclusion that they're not fit for human consumption. So even this experiment could not happen now with the farmland right around us, because we have bred and insecticide and pesticide and fungicide and psiticide, whatever, our food to where we can't change. America is making an enormous amount of food. We have enough food to feed about 3 times our population. We estimate we've got enough food to feed 1 billion people. We have about 1/3 of 1 billion of people living in the United States. But with the GMO and the Roundup Ready, I can't say that anymore, because right now, I don't know what would happen if people, that might be worse. That might be worse than eating the animal that food gets fed to. I don't know. It does concern me. This mass vegetarian experiment on 3 million people, can you imagine 3 million people in a whole country? That's like Brooklyn, New York. We have more than 3 million people in a suburb of one of our major cities. But here's what the point is. By going on a mass vegetarian diet, the death rate decreased from October 1917 to 1918, went down 34%, lower than the preceding 18 years. So they started keeping statistics around 1900. By the time the war came, this is what they found out. You notice the reference on this. Journal of American Medical Association, number 74, 1920. So why aren't all the doctors saying, you guys, we got to at least do as good as they did in World War I. You got to stop eating all the livestock and eat grains. Why aren't all the doctors telling you that when you go to the doctor's office? Amazing, wouldn't it be? Nature's laws. If men today were simple in their habits, living in harmony with nature's laws, as did Adam and Eve in the beginning, there would be an abundant supply for the needs of the human family. There is no need for one single person to be starving on our planet right now. But selfishness and indulgence of appetite have brought sin, misery, from excess on one hand and from want on the other. So what's the real problem with the food supply in our world right now? Selfishness and indulgence. We have no excuse for anyone starving in our world. We have abundant food. Even when there's a famine, we have abundance of food in another area that can take care of it. Ministry of Healing, page 47. World War II, did we do any better? German occupation in Norway. The Norwegian government was forced to sharply reduce, in some cases completely eliminate, meat to citizens. What a remarkable idea. Age-related death rate during that period of time in that country, we found 3 age groups, 40 to 59, 60 to 79, and 80 plus. In every single age group, regardless of the age, you can see that the death rate went down significantly in that country because of what they did. In the 40 to 59-year-old age group, it went from, and this is death rate per 10,000 population, so the peak death rate was about 1.2, 1.25, and it dropped down to 0.1. That's over a 12-fold decrease even in that population. This population was at 25 and dropped down below 5, a 500% reduction. In the 80-plus group, went from 200 to 100. It is never too old to get healthy. People say, I was talking with my neighbor, and I said his wife had gone on the program at a local hospital, and it was, if you can believe it or not, Hans Diehl's program for dealing with CHIP, Coronary Heart Improvement Program. You probably have heard of that. And it puts the people on a diet, and they feel better, and they show their blood lipids changing, etc., etc. And her name is Pat. I said, well, you should just go do what Pat was doing. He goes, oh, I'm 70. He goes, you know, how much longer? I'm going, wait a minute. See, I have a real hard time with a fatalistic attitude. I've lived my life. I've done what I can. Doesn't matter. And his doctor did him no favor, because his doctor told him that because he had such a high salt diet when he was young, that now he's going to have high blood pressure for the rest of his life, and probably you have to stay on your medications. These doctors are not being fair, and part of the problem with the people returning to hospital not getting better is because hospital doesn't have treatment for them. See, the hospital doesn't do good on lifestyle diseases. We really don't. And of course, we're looking at fat consumption, which is a major problem. The higher the dietary fat, which is going to be found where? In animal and animal-based products. You get rid of the animals, and even if you eat the corn, you don't have to worry about it. I know we feed corn to pigs to fatten them up, but I have never seen an individual person who's eaten nothing but corn get fat on it. I mean, how many ears can you eat at one meal? 5? 10? And if you want a weight challenge, eat nothing but corn and see if you can gain weight on it. Now, this is corn on the cob, okay? This isn't cream corn, and this isn't corn custard, and this isn't corn bread. This is corn on the cob. And corn chips, right. That's all. That's how man has manipulated the diet. Obviously, here's the bad news. After the war, fat consumption went back up, and so the death rate. So if you're a vegetarian because you have to be, do you think you're going to get credit for it? I'm asking a philosophy, but the point I'm trying to get at is, yes, an atheist will get credit for being a vegetarian, whether he believes in God or not. God is that merciful and that long. But my point here is that these people didn't have their heart in it. As soon as steak was available, they said, I want it. They didn't do what I'm telling you for health reasons. They did because of consequences of, money, poverty, war, etc. The most common cancers in the United States, as far as number, is lung for both male and female, colon for male, and the third is prostate. For ladies, it's breast and colon. Now, lung you can almost get rid of, and don't need to be on my chart here, if you're a non-smoker. 90% of people with lung cancer are smokers. 10% is not. So obviously smoking doesn't cause all lung cancer, just most of it. Colon is major dietary related, and we saw a little bit this morning in the Adventist Health Study how it's right here. Ladies, the dominant thing with breast is also diet and also colon. And when I say diet, diet has the greatest impact on hormones. Dr. Merrick, once again, the American Journal of American Medical Association, says some common cancers may be related to inadequate oxidation of vital tissues due to atherosclerosis. We have a double problem here in America. We block up our vessels, we don't get good oxygen to the tissue, and the tissue gets more diseased. The tissue has to have oxygen. It's intriguing that cancers of breast, colon, and prostate are mainly found in societies with cardiovascular disease. Cancer is on the rise, And cancer, back in 1940, would have been somewhere around 150 deaths, 150,000 deaths, and now we're up over 600. And your state may be like mine, and that is our number one cause of death in North Carolina is cancer now. It has outrun heart disease. And here's another graph. You can see that lung cancer was the highest. It's coming off. Prostate, colon, rectum, and pancreas. This one is the most deadly one, this blue line here, and it's leveling out. But the reason pancreas is the major problem is because everyone that gets it almost dies from it. We've got about, like I said this morning, 3% or 3 out of 100 are still alive after 5 years of the diagnosis. That's why I'm here for prevention. This slide was males, this slide is females. In the 60s, you saw lung cancer in females just go up rapidly. It went from maybe a rate of 5 per 100,000 up to over 42, 43 in that period of time. And you saw that breast cancer seems to be on a decline, colon, rectum. Pancreas is doing a steady rise through all of them. Now, if you get nothing out of this whole lecture, this slide is the most important because it puts everything into perspective. Number one, we're comparing death rate from cancer, well, from all causes here, 1950 to 2005. The first thing you should ask, what's the difference between 1950 and 2005? In 1950, we had about 150 million people in the United States. In 2005, we had about 315 million people in the United States. So the first thing you'd say, I've got twice as many people living in the United States now, or over that slightly, than I did before. So the first thing you should look for is that, to be fair, if we had the same amount of people dying in 1950 from a problem and the rate stayed the same, then I should have twice that many right now because I have twice the people, right? Look what happens. In heart disease rate, and when you deal with a rate, it's always per how many people, not just total. The numbers that you keep hearing over and over again are, this year, 622,000 people died of heart disease. That's true. But we have twice as many people as were in 1950, and look at the rate. Heart disease, it's said that in 1950, that's the dark bar here, 586 people died per 100,000 population. In 2005, I don't like this number, 211 people died from heart disease. What has happened to the heart disease rate in those 55 years? It's almost down 2/3. This is a little over 1/3 of that. So when you deal with population numbers, heart disease has come down significantly. The question is this: are my people healthier, or have I just kept them on stronger and stronger drugs and they're no more functional, not getting any more done, and more on disability? The answer to all of these is correct, correct, correct. They're spending more on medications, they're not as healthier, their quality of life is not better, and there's more and more people on the disability roll because of the sickness. Now let's look at cerebrovascular. Let's look at stroke. See, this should shock you because everyone thinks that everything is going totally up. It's not. Not when you deal with the total numbers. When you deal with stroke, we had 180 strokes per 100,000 population in 1950. By 2005, we have 46 per 100,000. So we had a drop from 180 to 46. Almost a 4 times drop. Now, I see a lot of questions on your faces because you're going, wait a minute, I'm hearing about a lot more. And you are. Because we have twice as many people in the United States now as we did back then. But see, those aren't fair numbers per population. And the reason I'm going through this, you see, I'm finally going to wind up with cancer here, because that's where the rubber really meets the road. Influenza and pneumonia, people die from pneumonia. We had 48 per 100,000 back in 1950, and now we have 20, so we dropped over half. But look at cancer. What have we done for cancer in the last 50, 60 years? From a number standpoint, we're an utter failure. And we've done more treatments and spent more money and have whole government departments dedicated to cancer research. Center for Disease Control, we have spent untold trillions, I'm using it correctly, to try to deal with this. Let's look at the rates. In 1950, the rate was 193. In 2005, it's 183. We basically have made no progress for everything we've done. The only thing we can do is please put prevention where it belongs and where it should be. That is the only recourse we have for this disease. We've made incredible strides in heart disease, stroke, influenza, and we've flunked out in cancer big time. So when you look at the numbers, the cancer rate goes up exactly the same rate as population growth. And we don't see any end in sight. We don't see this turning around. The individual cancer, you can say, well, lung is less now than it was before. I'm talking about the total burden. Okay, U.S. mortality. This is Adventist health data here, comparing it to regular Californians in 1991. You've seen this before. Heart attacks in the Adventist population are 56% of the general population, so we're almost 50% less of those that eat meat. I don't see how Adventists can look at this and go home to a steak. Lacto-vegetarian, 39%. Vegan vegetarian, 14%. To me, the choice is extremely obvious. Why would I be taking a risk with my life at 56% when I can have so much good food at 14%? It just doesn't make sense. Now let's look at the cancer area, because that's our topic. Those that eat meat, 42%. You can say, well, that's incredible. The general population is 100%, so this is a 60% decrease. Can I be happy with that? Well, you can be. But what about when you can drop it to 32% by giving up animal, and when you give up animal and animal products, you drop it to minimal. So people get aggravated when I say you can pick your disease. I happen to believe that. I also know that I live in a sinful world. And I also know that you can do everything prevention-wise and still die. Dietary fat and breast cancer, as a general rule, the higher the fat intake, the greater the rate of breast cancer. So we feel there's a correlation. You found United States up here, you found Portugal, Poland, Finland, and you find Thailand, low fat, low rate of breast cancer. If you look at it from a more comprehensive slide, you still have the Thailand, Japan here at the bottom. You still have the United Kingdom, United States, Sweden, and you've got Italy here in the middle. And I like to present that everybody brags on Italy because of olive oil, and I propose for you, we're talking about total fat intake here. Therefore, olive oil, number one, is not protective as it's claimed to be. And if you eat the same amount of olive oil as you eat of lard, you probably are going to get the same amount of problem. And I know Dr. Grundy has come out, and I was listening to an interview by him, and he made a statement that I will say shocked me. He said, food is just a way of getting more olive oil in you. And he cited a study where the participants drank a quart of olive oil a day and how that reduced certain symptoms. And I'm going, that's a bit extreme in my opinion, even for a research project. And hopefully I still had a gallbladder left he's the man, you may have known him, he's the man who promotes anti-inflammatory diet. I also recommend an anti-inflammatory diet, but I recommend you do it with corn on the cob. Lifetime of estrogen on high and low diet. Diet affects hormones that affect growth of tissue, abnormal growth of tissue, and giving you more cancers. Biological balance of estrogens on a starch-based, plant-based diet. Young ladies go through puberty later and they go through menopause younger. On the typical American diet, they have much higher estrogen levels. They go through puberty sooner at a younger age, and they go through menopause at a later age, giving their organs that are affected by estrogen, breast, uterus, and ovaries, a much greater risk of getting cancer. So if you want to lower your cancer risk, you're going to eat a diet that causes less of a hormonal response in the body. In Japan, their diet prior to World War II, right in here, prior to World War II, was a much greater plant-based diet. I think I've got a slide on Okinawa in here. A plant-based diet. Therefore, the young ladies growing up in Japan, their average age of going through puberty was 16.5 years. In Japan, after 75 years of becoming more westernized, more like us, and after World War II, they had dropped from 16 to 15.2, a drop of 1.3 years in 75 years. Now here's the scary part. In the next 10 years, they did what it took 75 years to do in the next population. In the next 10 years, they dropped 1.4, so the trend keeps going. And in 1974, when they concluded this study, it was basically the same for Japanese ladies as well as Caucasians living here in the United States. There's a reason why things happen. If you're an evolutionist, you say, well, they're just evolving and they're trying to adapt to their environment. And if you have a really polluted, messed up environment, if you're going to keep the species going, then you have to have babies at a younger age before they can keep the species. Because if you have babies at a later age and you don't get old enough to ever have a baby, what happens to the species? It dies off. So they look at it as that. I'm going, no. Why don't you just admit you're eating a poor diet? Just admit it. You know, that's the problem. Once again, decline in menses, puberty, from 20 in 1830s, 1880 to, you keep watching the line. Now it's approximately 10.7 years of age. Fred Hutchinson Cancer Institute. This is outside, totally outside the Adventist Health Study. This is a look at evaluating meat, eggs, and butter and cheese outside the Adventist community. Once again, these relative risks we talked about this morning. If the relative risk is equal to 1, it doesn't mean this group has no breast cancer. They just set whatever they have to 1. But now we add things to it. If an increase in meat was healthy for you, you would expect less breast cancer. It's 2.5 times eating it only 2 to 4 times a week. It's almost 4 times if you eat meat daily. Therefore, meat is one of the causes of breast cancer. How about eggs? Eating eggs one time a week, Eating eggs 2 to 4 times a week doubles it, and eating eggs daily triples your risk of breast cancer. And by the way, you think it's bad for the ladies, prostate cancer for men is probably worse than this on the scale when it comes to eating eggs. Breast cancer risk, according to butter and cheese, this is an interesting one. If you eat it once a week versus 2 to 4 times a week, you have a 3.25 increase, and if you eat it daily, it comes down. Don't ask me why that group had less than this group. I don't know why. I know that's the research that showed that. The point is that if you eat it about once a week, you're still way better off than anything else. And how about if you don't eat any? And that's the goal. Because it is not an essential food. There is no nutrients in butter or cheese that you can't get from a better source in a vegetable area. So there's no real excuse for that. Obesity, being overweight, increases breast cancer risk. Premenopausal, before menopause, if you're thin, your relative risk is 1. Overweight twice, obese 3 times. But if you're going to be overweight, do not be overweight when you get old. Because if you get older, postmenopausal risk is 1, 5, and 12 times the rate of breast cancer. So, what's the moral of the story? Lose your weight before you get old. How's that? Fats promote cancer, whether we looked at corn oil and we looked at lard. The percentage of rats, not humans here, with colon tumors. On a 10% corn oil diet, 36% of the rats had tumors. That's way too high. I don't want that many. But on the lard diet, the 10% lard diet, 17% had. So don't leave here and say that lard is healthy, okay? That's not the point of this slide. So 40% of the fat, when they increased it on corn oil, rats responded with a 64% of the rats got tumors. Lard, 67% of the rats got tumors. The take-home message is this, that lard is a more stable fat and will cause less rat tumors, colon tumors, at lower doses than corn. That is true. I propose something different. Don't use the lard and don't use corn oil. Eat corn on the cob. All the corn oil is still in that corn, but you're eating it with what? The fiber, the pulp, the flavor. Get some good sweet corn, you got it made. And by the way, don't use Mazola on the corn that had to come from another piece of corn that someone else got their other oil from another corn. Someone's getting gypped in this process. So when you put Mazola butter on your ear of corn, it took someone else's ear of corn to make up your butter to make so you can put it on yours. Maybe the pig got missed. I don't know who got the corn or who didn't get the corn. The point is, if your sweet corn is not good, then go ask for a refund or go back to the garden and do something. Sweet corn should taste good with nothing on it. If it doesn't, 2 things are wrong. Either the soil is bad or my taste buds need to be changed. You know, don't try to doctor up bad food. You don't need to salt. Good food doesn't need to be salted to death. It's good. Or sugared to death. You know, I know when you buy stuff in the can, you know what they do at the factory. They dump enough salt, enough sugar on it to make up for the bad crop they got. In fact, North Carolina, where I live, apple country, or where I work, they are legally allowed to put on their can no sugar added after they've added sugar in that can. I go, wait a minute, guys. They say we are legally allowed to bring it up to the standard level of sweetness if our crop that year does not come in sweet enough. And so it's a government standard, folks, has nothing to do with health. So if they allow 18% for their sweetness level, and the crop that year comes in at 14%, they can legally add white sugar to your apple juice to bring it up to the standard and still write on their container, no sugar added. How to lie legally. You go, wait a minute, folks. That's bold-faced. I think you'll find out something interesting about certified organic too. You study into that, and that will really turn your stomach a few times. Because once again, it's the same thing. If it's a government certification or a government standard, read the fine print. Because organic farmers are allowed to use certain insecticides and pesticides that are legal for them. So, if you think you're getting pure food, you have to grow it in your own garden. Not really. There are some farmers out there that believe what they're saying and what's true, and yes. But I'm saying, just because it says certified organic, make sure you know what the rules are before you... No, understand what the certification means. Colon cancer, this one we're talking about males here. Basically, the story's again. The higher the fat, the more colon cancer we see. Our body isn't made to handle these purified foods. We were never made to handle it. We can't handle it. And I happen to believe that we're not as healthy as our forefathers. Right now, the generation right now is not going to live as long as their parents. We feel we've reached the peak of longevity and we're coming down the other side. I don't know where all the 100-year-old people are going to go. Colon rectal cancer. 90% of cases occurs after age 50. So it takes you a while of abusing your body to get this. Third leading cause of cancer in the United States, second leading cause of death. Average lifetime risk is 6%. Women and men affected equally. So if that's true, then we can't blame it on hormones on either side of the coin. Women are more likely to have right-sided colonic adenomas. Right-sided, take your right hand. Right side means from appendix to your ascending colon and transverse. Ladies are more likely to have it here. Men are more likely to have it here. So there is a different distribution. One is a factor of which one eats more greens. Distributed evenly among racial groups, so it's not that. African Americans and Hispanics have lower survival rate. Some people attribute that to poorer medical care. I happen to think they might be wiser. But if you go in and get your stomachs taken out, your intestines taken out, I imagine it might help. Unsaturated fats, the reason I'm picking on them so hard is because they oxidize more readily. They can't handle the warmth. They don't do well without antioxidants. It is worse for you to separate a natural oil like corn oil out of the corn than it is for you to have butter fat that you've gotten from the milk or lard that you may have cooked out of the pig. See, vegetable oils are more vulnerable when you separate them. That's why we pick on them. It's not because corn is bad. It's not because olives are bad. But you have to buy the whole piece. The corn has oil in it. Eat the whole corn and I don't have to worry about you. The olive has oil in it. Eat the whole olive, eat the whole avocado, and I don't have to worry about you. Because why? What has God put in the corn that keeps the corn oil from going bad? What has God put in the olive that keeps the olive oil from messing up your cancer risk? What has God put in the avocado? I'm hoping it starts making sense because when we extract one component, what are we throwing away? That's the problem. We're throwing away the antioxidants. We're throwing away the things that keep this thing from being oxidized. Unsaturated fats, which we've preached long and hard because of heart disease and lowering cholesterol, are the same fats that are increasing our cancer risk. Prostate cancer, we'll work on men here for a minute. The charts almost get boring because they look like I've done the same one over and over again and put different names on it. No, it's really not that bad. Prostate cancer death rate, as the fat consumption goes up, so does the prostate cancer. There is something about refined fats that your body can't handle. Your immune system can't handle it. And when your immune system can't handle it and take care of the cells that go awry, and by the way, everyone has cancer cells. That's not the issue. The issue is, does your immune system recognize that, whoops, that cell's got a problem, get rid of them. You've got a whole organ called a spleen in your body, and its major job is to take care of all the mistakes the bone marrow makes making red blood cells. And when you make trillions of red blood cells a day, if you have a 1% error in your production, you have a major, major problem in your body. If you have a 1/10 of 1% production problem, we call that disease. If you have a 100% going wrong with your bone marrow production, we would be doing things like telling you to go visit the phlebotomist and donate your blood more frequently at the Red Cross and all this, just trying to keep your hemoglobin down. So what I'm trying to say is what may seem like a major problem and a major disease is usually a very, very small genetic anomaly that God has made us. And then he put a whole spleen in us to make up for that problem. So back to prostate cancer. Prostate cancer follows the same pattern, whether it's breast, whether it's colon, whether it's prostate. Italy, right here in the middle, with its extra virgin, cold-pressed olive oil, is still going to be as much problem if you increase the level till we get here in the United States. We just can't handle it, or we handle it poorly. The next area is protein. By the way, I'm not going to pick on everything, okay? Because there is so much good food out there to eat. Just don't mess it up. There's nothing wrong with eating cabbage or beets or carrots. Dr. Colin Campbell, now you guys know who that is. Some of you may have the book, the Colon Study, the China Study. The China Study was after the result of China Study 2, but he also makes references, I'm sure, to China Study 1. Two-stage study. The first study was looking strictly at China. And the geographic map for they call it a cancer map. And they were trying to figure out why some parts of China had as much as 100 times increase in cancer as another part of China. And they were studying those groups. The China Study 2 said, okay, we're going to take all our data from China and we're going to include the people that went to Taiwan. There are ancestors, there are brothers, there are sisters. They have the same basic genetics. Why are those guys turning diabetic, having heart disease, and stroking out down there when we're not doing that at home? That's what the China Study was really all about and the conclusion they came to. This part is where he is now, has gone to the Philippines. He's back home because he was of the belief, as many people were, that if we could only get enough protein to these malnourished countries, that we could save them. So he, as a food scientist, he went to the Philippines and said, okay, how do I get more protein to the population? Well, the ones that live near the coast, they can fish. We can get more food right to them. That's not a problem. But how do you take fish inland 100 miles in the heat with no refrigeration and keep it for a while? Well, that wasn't going to work out. So he said, okay, what can they grow? So he thought they could grow peanuts as their source of protein and grow it inland. Well, with the humidity and the temperature in the Philippines, peanuts would mold far too rapidly. And because of their sanitation, because of storage, they had what they called aflatoxin poisoning, which is a fungus poisoning that generates a carcinogenic compound that will knock out your liver. So, what did he find out? He came home and he said, okay, I've got to find out why my understanding and my experiment went wrong. Here's what he found out. Laboratory rats, back here in the United States, laboratory rats fed different amounts of protein. The 5% protein in the diet, which we would consider low, had the lowest rate of cancer growth. He says, okay, maybe all my thought about giving these people more protein is a mistake. He also read a journal that came from India, and they demonstrated that the wealthiest people, not the poor people in India, the wealthiest people had the most amount of liver cancer because they had the higher protein diets. Then he put his rats on a 20% protein, and there was a high rate of colon cancer, well, this is just cancer growth in general. Another study by the same author, Colin Campbell, 2 groups of laboratory rats. He injected a dose of carcinogen, which happened to be aflatoxin like in the Philippines, fed them a low protein diet, and they developed a low response to cancer. So even when you got cancer or a cancer-causing agent on a low protein diet, there was a much lower response. He injected a low dose. This was a high dose of cancer-causing agent, a low dose of aflatoxin, fed him a high protein diet, and developed a high response to cancer. Protein is a food that's essential for skin, for hair, for nails, etc., etc. We have made protein as a food source to run your body. That is a big mistake. You need carbohydrates. We are a carbohydrate machine. I didn't say sugar, I said carbohydrate. Carbohydrate is broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, any vegetable, any fruit. Those are all carbs. When people talk about carbs now, what they talk about is milkshakes and cheese and all these problem foods. But see, I'm not talking about sugar. I'm talking about unrefined, complex, high fiber, how you want to say it, carbohydrates. And that's really what that's what we're made to run on. Fats are stored fuel, and we need a little bit of that. Making hormones, coat your nerves. Carbohydrates is what you run your body on, and protein is what you build your body. Maybe this will help. How many times do you change the oil in your car compared to how many times you fill up with gas? You change your oil depending on how far you drive, every 3 to 6 months. Especially if you get this synthetic oil, it'll last longer for you, right? Gasoline, you figure you can't pass the pump enough. I'm always putting gas in this thing. Okay, the gas is the carbohydrate for your car. The oil is the protein. If you think of that comparison, it may help a lot. You do not need very much protein. In fact, high protein is what increases the risk of cancer. Dr. Campbell tried to find the optimum level of protein. He set it at 10. I would personally set it a little bit lower. But he said, foci, this is tumors, promotion by dietary protein. So in his laboratory rats, how many tumors were found? Foci development, tumor development here, on a percentage of protein. On a 4% diet, he found maybe 4, 6%, maybe 5, 8%, maybe 7. On a 10% diet, he was still less than 10 of the rats developing cancer. But look what happened between 10 and 12%. That's what he was looking for. He had almost a 2 to 2.5 times the rate by going from 10% to 12. And then we jump from 12 to 14%, look what happened. And then of course 20% protein, we look at some other rats, almost 85, maybe a little bit higher percentage of those rats had tumors. You will never have to worry about your protein if you eat like a cow. That is not a cow that's in the milk parlor eating high-powered, including stimulating food. I'm talking about a cow out grazing. Now I know that you and I do not digest grass like a cow does, so that's not quite the recommendation. But the cow that would graze on your garden, that would come in there and eat your Brussels sprouts, and eat your turnip greens, and eat your carrot tops, that's the cow that you need to be. And by the way, it is impossible for you to not get adequate protein by eating fruits, nuts, and grains and vegetables in their whole form, as long as you aren't starving yourself or trying to lose weight. But if you're maintaining your normal weight, and you're eating enough food to do that, you automatically get the protein. God's already worked this all out. You don't have to have your PhD to figure that one out. Comparison of high protein diets. High protein diet, 20% of your calories or more. There's a 72% overall risk or increase in mortality. So these people are dying on this high protein diet. Here's the shocking thing. On the high protein diet, there was a 28% reduction of overall mortality in greater than 65. I'm going, that is interesting. You mean as I get older, I need more protein? Or am I not absorbing it as well? What's wrong here? And then you keep reading the rest of the article. It says, in this high protein group, there's a fourfold, that is a 400% increase in dying from cancer. I'm going, well, for a 28% reduction, I think I don't like that. Those odds are really messing me up. And there's a fivefold or a 500% risk of dying from diabetes. Well, I don't like either of those. So I don't think that's a good deal for me to go on this high protein regime. And now the ketogenic diet is a whole nother problem. Moderate, they said at 10 to 20%. And a low protein diet, they said less than 10%. I propose to you that if a person gets 8% protein in their food, they're doing awesome. So you may be the person who doesn't want to eat as many nuts, but you want to eat your cabbage and your sweet potatoes and your squash and etc. You're fine. The relationship of everything I just told you as far as disease and protein, look at this, disappears if eating only plant proteins. Amazing, isn't it? Everything I just showed you was due to animal and animal proteins. Biology of proteins, increase in intake of animal protein, increased disease. It's high in saturated fat, there's no fiber, it's low in antioxidants, the cow got them all, and it's low in vitamins. The goat got them all. Plant protein, increased intake, no disease. It has the good kind of fats, it's high in fiber, it's high in antioxidant, it's high in vitamins. We're going to run out of energy or something here, so let me go through a few and we'll come back. Here's an important one. It's important because we don't put much emphasis on it. We always think that sleep is a waste of time. But people who sleep less obviously have the bottom line here. Men who slept only 4 hours a night ate 22% more calories the next day. Well, why do we eat more when we haven't got our rest? Oh, you're hungry. I need energy. I'm just not going to make it. So we try to eat our way through the day. Studies also found that a single night with only 4 hours of sleep led to insulin resistance, that's like being a diabetic, in 75% of the women and men in their 40s. So sleep deprivation increases a hormone in your system that is very highly inflammatory. It goes on. They were less likely to move sugar into their cells. That makes sense. They were insulin resistance, this is the take-home message, can lead to heart disease, diabetes, and possibly breast cancer. So sleep deprivation can actually increase your risk of breast cancer. American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. This slide in brief points out that on a low-fat diet you have less cancers of the skin cancers, than on a high-fat diet. People want to keep blaming the sun. I happen to blame the diet, and the sun is part of the component, but it's not the major component. They go to the beach and they put on sunscreen and then go eat all the junk that they have at all the restaurants around the beach. The problem is if they would skip the junk, they may not even need the sunscreen. But they're willing to put on sunscreen because I didn't mess with their appetite, see? See, it's easier to smear some cream on you than to knock out all the fried fish. That's the point. Chewing the fat, let's give one example. Once again, this is food equivalence. You can have one chimichang, whatever platter here. Thank you. 86 grams of fat, that's 1,600 calories at one meal. You can have 9.5 Dunkin' Donuts, that is 1,900 calories. You can have 86 pieces of white Wonder Bread for the same amount of fat, that's 6,000 calories. Or you can eat 172 apples, all for the same amount of fat. I like this one down here. Alfredo, fettuccine Alfredo, one dish. Can you imagine this? One restaurant, you sit down and you need a whole oil change. Almost 100 grams of fat on one platter. And you expect to be able to walk out of the restaurant without having a coronary. It's incredible. 5 Hostess cherry pies. You go, wait a minute, that's as bad as that? I go, yeah. 31 pieces of bacon broiled. Okay, that's supposed to be okay then, right? Or I can have 485 potatoes. I can have a potato every day of the whole year and not mess up as my buddy did on one meal. You see, I'm convinced that God made carrots, radishes, spinach, apples, and potatoes, and the rest of it, man either fed the wrong animal or made a mistake. I talked about this a little bit this morning. Cancer mortality, when we start comparing Mormons to Adventists, is appropriate. General population 100%, Mormon women 83%, Mormon men 68%. So they definitely have less cancer than the general population. And general, smoking and alcohol. Now when we get to Adventist women, there's 68% of the general population, and we get to Adventist men about half. So there's something in the red meat component here, or the meat component here, that this group here, the Adventist group, is missing. Well, you've seen that before, so we'll say it quick again. Dr. Campbell and Dr. Ethelstein have supported this program. We call it New Start, or we call it Weimar. We call it a lot of things, but the point is that this is what you're going to find online, ravediet.com. And it's really simple. The R is avoid refined foods. If you will do that one, you don't need any of the rest. They just made sure you know what we're talking about. Avoid animal products. And by the way, this is not Adventist health study. These are what people who have done the research are saying, how can I change my world? How can I help people have less heart disease, less cancer, less diverticulitis, less diabetes? You start going through the whole list. Avoid animal products. The V is what gets most of us in trouble. Avoid vegetable oils. Because somewhere in our head, we've been convinced that vegetable oils are good. Well, in their natural habitat, they are. And then the E is no exceptions, no excuses, no excuses. How many of you have gone online and bought the book on ravediet.com? It's worth your time. It's got recipes in the back. You may have to convert a few of them. Just put lemon juice instead of vinegar and you're going to be good for most of them. And you may want to use less of their spice or something. But it gives you a lot of good ideas to start from. So, we talked about the problem. Now I finally get to talk about what I want to, but you're going to get to have lunch first, okay? This afternoon, we'll go through and look at cancer prevention. Not after you have cancer and how many fever treatments I need to give you a week. We're going to talk about what we call primary prevention. How do I avoid it totally? That's what we're going to spend our time on. And so please bring your questions, your observations, and we'll go from there, because it's the old rule. It is much easier to prevent something from happening initially than trying to get back. It really is.